Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Fact or Fiction Friday. I want to say happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. That would have been yesterday.
Yep, but
Yeah.
hey, happy Thanksgiving.
Hope you guys had a good time.
Yep, full of food. Back on the scales, 10, 20 pounds heavier.
Don't forget to set your scales back 10 pounds.
That's right. You got to recalibrate them. Them things be lying.
All
Anywho,
right. So today, go ahead and get this introduction going.
yep. So this is a story of a young African American lady whose life was cut short due to cancer. Uh, After she died, she made a huge impact on the entire world. Stay tuned to hear the story about an immortal woman who changed the world.
All right. So we will call her Henny Lance. So that's her name, Henny Lance. She was born in August of 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. Her mom died during childbirth when she was 4 years old, so she was sent to live with her grandfather and her older cousin David. As a young kid, she began working on her grandpa's farm and she attended school until she was in the sixth grade. She then would have her first child, a son, when she was 14 years old by her future husband, who was also her cousin David.
Cousin David.
Yes. They would have a daughter 4 years later, but due to them being cousins, she had complications and she was deaf.
Henny and David would get married in 1941, and they left the farm behind and moved to Maryland and were able to purchase a home. The homes was like $20 back then. They would go on to complete their family with the birth of their fifth child. Before, during, and after the birth of her fifth child, Henny started to notice something was wrong. She described having this knot, like a feeling of a knot in her stomach, but after she found out she was pregnant, she ignored it. After the baby was born, she went to the hospital to get checked out. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer 4 months after the baby was born. This meant that her baby was in her womb with the cancer cells and was a miracle.
All right, so during her treatments, tissue samples were taken from her cervix, tissues that were both cancerous and healthy. Henny would pass away 8 months after her diagnosis. But those cells we told you about were not dying. In fact, researchers were astounded that instead of dying like normal cells, were duplicating every day or two. The researchers had discovered something never seen before. They could use these cells to do research. They would survive long enough to see the research through. The medical center shared with the world what they had, and they named them after Henny. They began to ship them at no cost all over the world to further research in labs that needed them. They began to help with vaccines and cures and in eradicating deadly diseases. These cells were changing the world for 5 years before Henny's family ever knew about it. The cells began to mix with other cells in labs, and researchers realized that they needed to be able to distinguish them from other cell families. So, Henny's family members began receiving calls for blood samples. And they're like, why? And then that's how they discovered what was going on.
All right, so the research center would go on to inform the family about how remarkable Henny was, and they began working with them once they voiced their opinions about privacy. The research facility made sure to protect their privacy and any information regarding their medical conditions. Research using Henny's miraculous cells continued.
All right, guys. So we told you a story about African American lady who discovered she had cancer. During the process to research her cells and tissue samples, a miracle was discovered as her cells did not die off like normal cells but were multiplying. This opened doors for medical research. Do you think this story is fact or fiction? Can cells do this? Can they continue to live and not die off even though the lady passed away? Do you think the story is fact or fiction? Go ahead and comment below.
That's right. BS detectors, you want to see them magnifying glasses if you're
Let us
not
know
sure.
what you think.
Yep. All right, guys. So this story is fact.
This story is a fact. This is the story of Henrietta Lacks. So we changed her name to Henny Lands, but Henny is her nickname and her last name is Lacks. This year is the 70th anniversary of her death. She did have cancer and she did pass away at the age of 31 in Baltimore, Maryland in 1951. She was treated at Johns Hopkins, which was one of the few places where she lived that treated African Americans at the time. Dr. George Otto Gay was one of the researchers who discovered her cells were multiplying. And when she passed away, he ordered more samples to be taken off of her body. He then isolated a cell and began dividing it repeatedly, and the HeLa cell research line was born. HeLa is the name of the cells. He took the first 2 letters of her first name and the first 2 letters of her last name, and that's how they got the name HeLa. And it was a miracle, guys. Before this, cells would only last so long and they would die off, and that cell family would end when they died. Mm-hmm. Her cells were not dying, they were multiplying. So that's where the miracle is, because it never happened before, and I don't think since. Her cells were the only ones that were doing this. And we're going to go ahead and give you a little bit of information about what research was done and how these cells changed the world.
They used these HeLa cells in making the polio vaccine, and as we know, polio was eradicated in the United States. Mm-hmm. They also used these cells in cancer research as well as in AIDS. They were used to test the effects of radiation, which, if you watch one of our previous videos, we talked about that.
We talked about radiation.
Yeah. They also used them to develop gene mapping, which helps to identify which genetic element is responsible for which disease. Her cells were also used in research for the latest pandemic.
And I kind of want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe we can say the C19 word on YouTube, because I've heard a lot of YouTubers say that they can't say it, so I'm just going to go with it. But you know what we're talking about. So when they went to try to do research and figure out how this virus was sticking to cells and becoming this pandemic, they realized that they were not sticking to her cells at all. And that's when they realized how the virus was entering the cells. And so they had to modify her cell to have those little spikes that cells have, which hers did not. And then they realized that that is what was being used for the virus to enter. And so that was a big revelation to figure out, like, how this is being, communicated or being caught, I guess, from all over the world, from everyone. So that was a big deal with the research for this, using the HeLa cells. And I thought, like, when I read that, I thought that was pretty cool, because they didn't even know how it was entering in, so until they did that. Okay, so they were also the first cells to be successfully cloned for research purposes. When we told you that they started to duplicate them on their own, they duplicated by themselves, but then labs started to duplicate them too, and that was the first time that ever happened. They also use them to test human sensitivity to things. Like a lot of people have latex sensitivity. They use these cells to test like cosmetics. Those of you like me who love makeup, we are putting pretty much chemicals on our face, so they had to figure out like, to make sure they're putting things that are safe, and they use this HeLa cells to do that. And and then to talk about the family further. As we mentioned, the family learned about this research, after it had already been done and been going on for years. And then they did find out because the HeLa cells were taking over labs, and they were contaminating other families and things like that when research was being done, and they didn't necessarily have DNA attached to them anymore because they were duplicated. So they had to figure out what DNA was in them, and that had to come from her family. And so they can differentiate which HeLa cells were in the wrong, like, tubes, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, guys. Mm-hmm. But that's what they had to do. So they were calling them, asking them for blood samples, and they didn't know why. So they happened to figure out, by a chance meeting what was happening. And they all were concerned, like, this is my family. Is anything about me going to get out to the public? Are people going to know? Then they had to work with John Hopkins to, like, some of them had to get on committees and things like that to make sure that they were safe. And, lawsuits happened with the family and over this. But it was ruled, that once they take these samples, they don't belong to you anymore. And so, but they did pursue another legal battle, as the latest one was this year. Huh. So her family really, didn't like that this happened, but they understood that it was very rare and it was a miracle and that it could change the world. And I have not seen it, but there is a movie about her where Oprah plays her daughter, and I think it's called like Henrietta Lacks Immortal Cells, I think. But if you Google her and put the word movie behind it, you can find it. I haven't seen it. I've seen documentaries, but I've not seen the actual movie. I'm pretty sure it's good. Huh. So, and there's lots of books. And those of you who are smarter than me, if you want to explain things that maybe I struggle with, go ahead down in the comments below. But I do know that they're used all over the world, even to this day. And this was over 70 years ago when they were discovered. So I think that's pretty cool. She passed away, but she was made immortal by her cells that just kept thriving and duplicating. And so thank you guys so much. And again, if this is your first time hearing this story, I want you to share this with a friend. Here at the BS Station, we do want, you guys to learn things and share the knowledge as we are trying to do.
Yep.
Yeah. So share it with a friend.
Share, subscribe, and tell everybody about the BS Station, because we out here. Until next time.
We'll
Bye.
see you guys next time.